Welcome and thank you for joining us on our webinar on inclusivity across the board. National Inclusion Week, a week to celebrate and share knowledge. We are all important as one another, and inclusion to me means it's up to us to make sure no one feels left behind. If we don't build an inclusive and diverse organisation, we can't serve the people we're here for. This year's theme is Each One, Reach One, which is all about bringing individuals and organisations together to connect and inspire each other to make inclusion an everyday reality in the workplace. And that is exactly what we are going to do today. Next slide, please, Jess. So thank you for joining us. My name is Anjum Khan and I am the Director of the Asian Business Chamber of Commerce. And today we have four panellists who have joined us. We have Darroch, Head of Diversity and Inclusion from the Football Association Group, Shani Dhanda, Disability Rights Advocate, founder of Diversibility Card and Asian Women Festival, Councillor Sharon Thompson, Birmingham City Council Cabinet Member for Homes and Neighbourhoods, and Mike Morgan, Director of Hayes Specialist Recruitment and co-founder of the Alliance Group. If you would like to ask any question from our panellists, we will have a Q&A session at the end. Can I ask that you put your questions in the chat box? If you encounter any technical difficulties, please note that use the general chat box and our team will be able to help you. Thank you for that. So now I would like to make you aware of the GBCC and its continuing support through the unprecedented period. And what I do want to say that if anyone who is on this webinar today, or if you know of anyone who wants any support around COVID-19, please do make contact with us. You can do this through our website as well, which is www.greaterbirminghamchambers.com. Hashtag, sorry, there is COVID-19 as well. We have also launched our phase to the Asian Business Chamber of Commerce Business Support Campaign. Can I have the next slide, please, Jess? So this campaign that we're running at the moment, it is a 6 weeks campaign and is our phase 2. There is support around HR, legal and financial, but what we are also doing is supporting employers and employees whose English is not their first language. So we do have support around Urdu, Punjabi and Bengali. Any business, whether they're a member or not a member, they can call the hotline, which is at the bottom of the slide. And yeah, please give us a call if any business needs to know what they should be doing legally. And if any employees are not aware of what their employees should do, they can also give us a call and we are here to support. Thank you. So our first speaker is Darroch. Darroch currently leads on the FA's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy across the national football in England. He's also Equality and Diversity Lead on the Board of Business of the Community West Midlands and Head of Sport Development and PR Strategy for the UK's first ever SEEK Games in 2022. Over to you, Darroch.
Thank you. I will just share my screen. You could just give me a shout and let me know that you can see it.
Yep, perfect.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So, hello everyone. Really where I'm coming from is that I believe that inclusion eats strategy for breakfast. We've all heard about culture being the most important facet of a business. It's rubbish, because inclusion is actually what eats strategy for breakfast. I won't undermine the famous Peter Drucker, who actually said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. But where I'm coming from and the role that I do, I believe it's inclusion which is at the heart of performance. So I'm Darroch, as Anjum had said. I'm Head of Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Programs at the Football Association. And many of you might wonder how football and the words diversity, inclusion and belonging go together. Well, of course, the media and other narratives tell us regularly that football can be discriminatory, or that there's been a case of racism in the game, for example. And of course, every industry, workplace and organisation wants to ensure that it gets the best out of its people, but that is never helped when your industry is dominated by headlines across the world on a regular basis. And of course, in football and the FA, our stakeholders are so huge. It's such a huge and diverse group of people. You could argue that almost everyone is a stakeholder of football, from young people to older people to people with disabilities, coaches, parents, volunteers, schools, community groups, charities, county football associations, and of course fans. The list really is endless. And I won't really talk about the benefits of D&I because I think we're all sold on that and we know the financial business case is very clear. But let's put all this into context. Given the global pandemic and where it leaves us as a business and organisations, you know, as we attempt to really navigate this very unprecedented time. Of course, for football has been cancelled and it has resumed very slowly. The Euros 2020 for the men's game was cancelled, of course, and has been moved to next year. And sport as a whole really has been knocked out by this virus. And it's also worth pointing out at this time that certain communities such as Black, Asian and wider minority ethnic people are really experiencing high levels of anxiety and discontent about recent events and what they've uncovered. So, you know, they not only address public acts of discrimination, such as what happened to George Floyd in the US, but they also uncover wider incivilities that underrepresented groups often face. And on top of that, the recent pandemic and of course COVID-19 and its link to BAME communities only heightens the feeling that if you are from a BAME community, for example, you're not really in a good place. The findings suggested that if you're from a BAME background, then you're more at risk of death from COVID-19. Actually, one of the issues in football, and for us as a national governing body of football in this country, you know, we're guardians of the game. There's 30 million spectators, of which 16 million or so are adults. There's 12 million participants of the game, and there's over 100,000 grassroots teams. And football is not just what you see on the TV. That's a really small fraction of it. So really, for context, some of the big challenges for sport and for football are the fact that we need to ensure that diversity is massively reflected in our organisation because of our stakeholder group. You know, it's such a massive and diverse group of people. We need to make sure that diversity is reflected in our organisation. We also need to make sure that the insight that we use is giving us, you know, the right ways to look ahead for the future. And of course, discrimination is something that comes up quite regularly in football, whether it's, you know, homophobia, LGBT, whether it's, you know, sexism, anything gender-based, or whether it is, you know, racism and discriminatory acts along those lines, or even, you know, things such as antisocial behaviour. And so our challenge really is to make the game for all. You know, the FA's mantra is that we want to make the game for all. And one of the big things there is how we change public perception, you know, which is sometimes, you know, depending on how the England squads are doing, public perception is either good or it can be quite negative at times. And of course, you see Raheem Sterling there, a top England international. He's someone who's been very vocal on diversity and inclusion issues in the game, and especially about issues of race, for example. So you understand the context. I've given you just a very quick overview of some of the issues and challenges in our game. But let me tell you a little bit about what really inclusion means to me. So of course, many people, they wrap diversity and inclusion up together, closely followed by this new word that we keep hearing about now, which is belonging. And it's worth highlighting what these mean, but also how they manifest themselves in the workplace. So when we talk about diversity, we're not simply just talking about race, which is a common misconception. You know, it's also the power of difference in mindset, in approach, and what we call cognitive diversity. Social mobility, experience, culture, geography, all of these kind of things contribute to what we call diversity. And then inclusion is really, if you've got your groups of diverse people in the room, for example, have you got those people working at their best? And that's really what, you know, what we mean by inclusion. And if we look at the dimensions of inequality that you can see on the screen there, which is a lens to, if we use that as a lens to explore inclusion, we can begin to see various ways in which exclusion can manifest itself. So I'll touch on them very briefly. And we'll use race as an example, you know, as something that's quite common in football. If we look at internalization, for example, towards the bottom, internalize, these are the kind of things that many of our people live with as part of their beings and their personality. You know, such examples of certain internalization from an equality perspective can be, you know, maybe the feeling that you're not listened to or taken seriously, or it could be that you're suffering from something like imposter syndrome, which is where you question your self-worth because you are different. Perhaps you might be the only female in the room, or you might be the only BAME person in the room, for example. And in recent weeks, you know, myself and members of my team and people across the FA, we've had various conversations with our staff as a result of what happened with COVID and obviously the George Floyd, the tragic death of George Floyd. It's opened up a whole load of conversations about inequality in our workplace, not just race related. And so another example of internalization really is, you know, which can lead to inequality, is the feeling that perhaps as a black person, for example, you may have to dilute your personality for 8 hours a day while you're at work. And can you imagine not being able to be your true self for fear of being singled out or be seen as different? And this really addresses the true essence of inclusion, which is how do we get the best out of our people while they're at work so that they are productive and they possess high levels of morale. That certainly isn't the case if you have to dilute your persona, for example. And then when we talk about interpersonal, we're talking about, you know, discriminatory acts, for example, that are carried out that happen during interpersonal situations. So this is where we see things like microaggressions and micro-incivilities, where perhaps a minority person is called out for being different, and where a person is potentially unconsciously treated in a different way. And good examples of this is, for example, where a BAME staff member may feel overlooked for promotion, or they get their afro hair touched, you know, without their permission. And from a personal perspective, you know, I've had that kind of experience where people have said to me, you know, do you shower in that? And do you go to bed in that? And of course, I've, you know, it's references to my turban. And of course, you know, that if you've got a thick skin, you know, that's the kind of things that I can reference back and respond to people and educate them on what it means and what, you know, how this all works for me as a human being and my identity. But you can imagine if you're an individual in the workplace and you get those kind of questions, how it can affect your ability to perform at work. And of course, we know that things have changed over recent years because discrimination sometimes can be covert. You know, it's not as overt it was in the days of the 50s and 60s, for example, you know. And let's understand that, you know, certain populations, such as BAME communities, are now 3 or 4 generations in. And therefore, you know, the experiences of things like racism or covert discrimination is often now not physical, but it's actually very covert. So really, you know, now no more kind of turning the cheek, and we need to ask ourselves, are we getting the best out of our people? I won't talk too much about institutional or structural, you know, in this case, you know, inequality. But what I do want to say is that, you know, businesses are run by people. Without people, you don't really have a business. You know, people are irrational human beings, and that's what creates a culture in a business. I won't read out the stats there, but you can see, you know, over half of BAME employees believe they have to leave their current organisation in order to progress. And if you're a woman, you know, it's even higher if you're from a BAME background. So we come back to this notion that we are human beings. And so, you know, a culture is a collection of human thought. It's brought together to create a collective of goals and targets and outcomes that your organisation is going for. And so for that reason, strategy only gets you really so far. It's the inclusion of your people, your biggest asset, that takes you to another stratosphere. And you only have to look at disruptors such as Google, Amazon, Airbnb, Uber, for example, and their unconventional cultures and inclusive environments to see who is doing this well. So that is a question we all must ask ourselves, regardless of our industry, regardless of our sector, and regardless of who we are ourselves. Are we getting the best out of our people? If not, why not? And that for me is the true essence of inclusion. That is why inclusion eats strategy for breakfast. And in football, that's how we make our beautiful game truly for all.
Thank you, Dal, and absolutely right. Inclusion is at the heart of performance, and inclusion is strategy for breakfast, indeed. So if you have any questions for Dal, please do put them in the chat box for us, and I will ask Dal at the end of when we come to our Q&A. So thank you, Dal. Our next speaker is Shani Dhanda, an award-winning disability specialist and social entrepreneur, listed as one of the UK's most influential disabled people. Welcome, Shani, over to you.
Thanks, Anju. So hi everyone. As a practitioner for inclusion across business, government, not-for-profit and wider society, I help organisations break barriers and interrogate inclusion into their business frameworks. And today I wanted to use this opportunity to talk to you about disability inclusion. I always feel it never gets the time that it needs, and businesses don't prioritise it enough over other inclusion strands. So I was reflecting on the fact that over 500 organisations have signed up to National Inclusion Week this week. And as we know, it's all about bringing people and organisations together to connect and inspire each other to make inclusion an everyday reality. It's designed to celebrate everyday inclusion in all its forms. And I believe it's needed now more than ever. because despite disability being the largest diversity strand, it has the lowest priority on the overall inclusion agenda. While 90% of businesses claim to prioritise diversity, only 4% focus on making offerings that are disability inclusive. And recent findings show that only 8% of companies feature disabled people in their marketing and advertising collateral on a regular basis. Gender, race and LGBTQ+ issues are more commonly prioritised over disability in the corporate diversity inclusion agenda. And now I just wanted to delve into how big the community actually is, because I don't think people understand disability or the prevalence. So we're just going to cover that now quickly. So here in the UK, the latest figures show that there are 14.1 million disabled people. So that's 1 in 5 of us. That represents 21% of the UK population. And I'm sure you'll agree, it's a huge population to continually be overlooking. But disability has struggled to sustain momentum and influence across society as a significant issue. And this is because of several key challenges. So firstly, it's a very broad issue. Disability is seen as diverse, and that makes it harder for people to understand how to support and the impact that this will have. There's the lack of representation. The lack of disability representation in wider society and in the workplace means that disabled people don't understand the challenges disabled people face or the support that they require, or actually how to support them. And then also there's a lack of knowledge. So organisations are still struggling with how to be more inclusive across the board effectively. And as COVID-19 continues to have wide-reaching impacts across the globe, disabled people are disproportionately affected, often having less income, less access to health, and less access to education. But I really wanted to use this opportunity speaking to a business community, because I believe that businesses have an influential and crucial role to play in really moving the dial on disability inclusion. And just to demonstrate this, over the last 6 months in the UK, we have donated more money to pet charities, so animal welfare, than disability charities that actually support disabled people who over the last couple of months have faced even further inequalities due to COVID. The dial on disability inclusion just can't be moved by charities and governments alone. It needs the power of businesses. Businesses and brands have the ability to influence culture and influence society in a way that, unfortunately, charities and governments and the not-for-profit sector just doesn't. And I believe that businesses have to take that responsibility seriously, and they have to do better to end the inequality crisis for disabled people for today and in future generations. And then when we look at the business case, businesses can't afford to exclude such a huge market comprising of talented employees and valuable customers with a significant spending power of £274 billion to the UK economy every single year. So my ask is that we need every single leader championing intersectional inclusion, and to stop cherry picking and focusing on particular diversity strands, because we need to give equal importance to all diversity strands every single day of the year, not just 1 week in the year. And finally, I just wanted to finish by saying that every decision that we make can either raise or lower barriers to participation in society. It's our collective responsibility to remove these barriers, and that's down to our knowledge and the decisions that we make. Thank you.
Thank you, Shani. No doubt we'll be getting some questions through, and we can ask you. So thank you for sharing that with us. So our next speaker now is Councillor Sharon Thompson. Sharon has been a councillor since 2014. She served as Victims Champion for the city from 2014 to 2015, before becoming the local authority's first ambassador for addressing homelessness and rough sleeping. She's also the Cabinet Advisor for Homelessness from 2017 to 2018, and really clinched the position in May 2018 when she was appointed to Cabinet. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here today. It's been great listening to the previous speakers. It's been like music to my ears. I think inclusion is hugely important in its entirety, and no particular group should be left out of that narrative. But I'm going to specifically be talking about from the race perspective when I'm speaking today. And I think the starting point for me will be that when it comes to businesses, we know that 250,000 firms were ethnic minority led in 2018. £25 billion was raised through the economic contribution of ethnic minority entrepreneurs, and that 17% of the ethnic led firms were led by women. And that is just a snapshot of some of the contributions that we have made in the business sector in its entirety. Now, business for me is also, and just across the board, not just business actually, when it comes to the city, we are a city that really prides ourselves on our diversity and the number of religions, faiths, communities that reside in Birmingham. But I always say diversity without inclusion often leads to tokenism when it comes to certain areas. And that's why I think it's hugely important that we make sure that we include different communities and different experiences when it comes to the business sector. We've seen how much we can contribute financially, how much we contribute in terms of the firms, but I think in the wider context, we need to make sure that we are reaching out and looking at the different groups when it comes to consumerism, not just the entrepreneurs, but also non-executive roles when it comes to companies, and also actually looking at the political space and how does that fit into the narrative of business, of trying to push forward the national policies that affect businesses across the country. And with that, I really push for businesses and the community to be a lot more smarter when it comes to data collection, and to be making sure that we can advertise and help people to contribute to data collection in a safe way. And when I say safe, I mean safe in feeling how to contribute, because many people feel reserved about contributing to some of these internal dialogues when it comes to surveys and different things like that, because they don't want perceptions thrown onto them. So I think we have a lot to contribute in its entirety. And I know for myself that when we look at Black and Asian ethnic minorities, I'm very keen that we start to dismantle the term and look below that, because within that we'll see there's different categories of challenges, cultural experiences, practices, and depths of inequalities faced in very different ways between those different groups within that category. Now, we all know what happened when George Floyd was murdered over in America, and what ripple effect that had for us across the globe. And for myself, that sort of raised up questions, as it did for everybody else, but I'm very much about positive action. And that's why I got behind a project which was Black Pound Day, which was really encouraging people to spend with Black-led businesses across the country, but mainly here in Birmingham on the first Saturday of every month. And that was just to help those businesses with visibility and help to kind of even out the level playing field for those businesses as well. And I think it's hugely important, that's why it's to see the differences between the different communities within the categories of BAME. And that's why I'm also proud to be coming behind also the Black Project, which I met with yesterday, because they are also looking at different ways to support Black businesses on levelling up and getting their practices up to a great standard so that we can hugely contribute towards the UK economy in a much stronger way. And I will hand back over to you, Chair.
I've got myself on mute. I apologise. I hope you can hear me now. So thank you for that, Sharon. And once again, if you have any questions for any of our panellists, please do type away under the Q&A. Our next speaker is Mike Morgan, who is the Director at Hayes Specialist Recruitment. Mike is also Chair of the UK and I LGBTQ and Pride Network, which launched in 2019. Mike is also the co-founder of the Alliance Network. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Let me share screen. Okay, so thanks very much for having me. Really been looking forward to doing this today. So I'm going to talk about the inclusion progress in LGBTQ and what still needs to be done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through just a couple of slides that I've prepared. Now, the first one is going to be looking at a report from Stonewall, which is kind of like the UK's, well, globally, the leading kind of authority on LGBTQ diversity and inclusion issues. Now, I will warn you now, it's not the most, what's the right term? I want to put it this way. I was pretty upset when I read this report when it first came out. It's the most up-to-date one, and it's about what workplaces are doing around LGBTQ employees. So it's a little bit hard-hitting, and it's quite data-driven and fact-driven. But I'm going to go on to talk about actually what we're doing in Birmingham and the progress we're making in Birmingham specifically around LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace. So sit tight, I'm going to take you through some pretty horrific stats, okay? So this is a report called LGBT in Britain Work Report 2018. So as I said, it's the most recent one I could get my hands on and read through. It's a 20-page long document, and I've kind of pulled out what I thought would be the main points in terms of the key findings from the reports and then the recommendations. And you'll see on here that I've actually started a couple of the recommendations because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I think those are quite important ones and what I'm doing in my own organisation with those recommendations. So some of the facts then. Not every LGBT person feels supported by their employer, and a particularly trend of that, it was in the bi and the trans community. Almost 1 in 5 LGBT staff have felt targeted in the workplace. Okay, so that's quite a high proportion. 1 in 8 trans people have been physically attacked in the workplace in the last 12 months for being trans. And similarly, 1 in 10 BAME LGBT staff have been attacked in the last 12 months. So some pretty hard-hitting stats there. Almost 2 in 5 bi people aren't out to anybody at work about their sexual orientation. And I think that worked out about 38%, which again is a horrifically high number. And 1 in 8 LGB people wouldn't feel confident reporting any homophobic or biphobic bullying in the workplace. So some pretty hard-hitting key findings there. But the good news is that an increasing number of employers are waking up to the fact that to succeed in their individual businesses, the staff need to feel confident at work, being their full authentic selves. So without going through all 20 pages of the report, because they do take all of the key findings and break them down into the methodology and how they got that data, I'm just going to run through the recommendations because I actually think it's more important for us to talk about what we're doing in the Birmingham area rather than focus too much on the stuff that is currently happening. So recommendations, right, for businesses nationally to help support these key findings is develop clear policies. Okay, now normally that's HR led, but actually I think it's really important the operational teams within businesses get involved with this. Supporting your staff through training, improve your trans inclusion policies, recruit and promote diverse candidates, and monitor staff diversity. Support any visible role models and work with other businesses in the community. So as I said, some of the ones that I've starred here are kind of the ones that I'm focusing on as a business in the UK and Ireland, okay? So supporting our visible LGBT role models is something that I find really, really important. And we have a number of in our business, senior level, director level people that identify as LGBTQ. So we do a lot of work within my own Pride network of kind of raising their profile, giving them a platform to talk to our younger generation of LGBTQ staff and let them tell their stories and why it's important to be their whole self and show everyone else in the business that actually it's okay if you identify as someone a little bit different and LGBTQ. A really relevant one for us at the moment is monitoring our staff diversity. So we only have 17% of our entire UK workforce filled in our diversity survey, right? So tomorrow we are launching, relaunching it, and our aim is to get that up to 70% plus. So we've done an awful lot of comms around this in the last month of why it's important, because as is often the case with big corporates, they kind of just send stuff out and hope everyone will fill it in. But actually, we've done a really big piece around why it's important for us to have this kind of confidential data so that we can actually make our organisation a better place to work. And by knowing the makeup of your organisation, you can actually make the working environments a lot better for those people who do feel like they're in the minorities. And develop clear policies. Now, this often, as I said earlier, is HR led, but the direction actually in my business comes from me around LGBTQ inclusion. If I feel like we are lacking in a certain area to do with our policies, I instruct our HR team to start doing some research and start getting some data around that. So lots of things on there in terms of recommendations that Stonewall have put together, and I can quite happily send out the link to Jess after this for anybody who would like to have a read through of it. But it is a really interesting read, although albeit a little bit hard hitting. So moving on to Birmingham's LGBT inclusion progress. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Alliance Network, and for those of you that don't know or haven't come across it before, the Alliance Network is a professional networking group that I was delighted to be asked to form part of their steering group committee when we first came up with the idea about 5 years ago now. It's basically a place for employers and employees to share best practice in Birmingham and kind of like the greater Birmingham area to make businesses thrive. Our overarching goal is to make Birmingham the best place to work if you're LGBTQ. And there is a vast variety of companies, from public sector, charities, professional services companies that are now part of the committee and part of the overall membership. So it started off with 5 people sat around a table from leading law firms and professional services firms in Birmingham going, we don't do anything in Birmingham for our staff who are LGBTQ, and actually if we did want to do anything, we'd have to go to London to do it. And not everybody can get down to London that quickly around that time. So we came up with some ideas of doing a couple of events just to test the water, really, to see whether or not there was an appetite in Birmingham for a networking event and for people to share best practice. So we held an event and it was to do with role models, and we had some very senior people, the Chief Superintendent of West Midlands Police, who was openly LGBT. She came and spoke and talked about her story and what it was like rising up through the ranks of the police force. And we actually had 70 people turn out for our first ever event. So we realised that actually we were onto something. And every year we try to do 3 to 4 kind of big events in Birmingham where we have guest speakers and panellists and often break out into work groups. But it's very important to us that actually the work that we do is there's something tangible to take away from every single event. So something that people come, a toolkit is produced, and then they can take it back to their organisation and implement bits and pieces to make their environment much better for LGBT staff. So as we stand at this moment, there are over 550 individual members of the Alliance Network from a vast array of different size, scale-up companies, all at different stages of their LGBTQ inclusion programs. Okay, there are people in there that have very established processes and protocols and are very good at looking after and attracting and retaining their staff. And there are companies in there that are just starting out and coming to us for advice on how to start and grow a network. So we're pretty good at offering support to companies and organisations that want to do better. And I'm pleased to say there's only over 80 single organisations now as part of the network with, as I said, 550 individual members. So it's going great guns. We have a 2023 roadmap plan of where we want to take the network, and we want to make it even bigger and better to support the Birmingham market and the Birmingham LGBT community. For those of you that may or may not have heard, we have Birmingham LGBT Centre, which is based just down just off of Hurst Street. And that is an amazing drop-in centre, although I'm not quite sure if they are completely open at the moment, but they are on hand to help anybody, either just individuals or companies, with any type of questioning that you have around LGBT inclusion. So they're a really good bunch of people that do a lot of good for the community, and also help raise awareness of certain key issues. And they work very, very closely with Stonewall as an organisation. So Steph Keeble is the CEO there, quite regularly gets involved with the Alliance Network and does quite a lot of our events and helps push out to the right people. In terms of other support networks and how Birmingham has progressed, okay, there are, apart from the Alliance Network, which has only come in the last 5 years, there are other networks as well. Openland, they've been around for about 3 years now, focusing purely on the construction and property market. So very, very niche, but again, lots of organisations that are in that sector get together for conversations around how they can make their organisations better within LGBT inclusion in the construction and property sector. Inter-engineering, very similar one, a national one, but they have regionalisation, regionalised groups of people and steering group committees, and that's that focus on the engineering and into tech based on the technology area. So just a quick overview. With my experience with the Alliance Network, I was very fortunate to be able to give the opportunity to start my own internal network at Hayes. And I would suggest that if anybody wants any advice on how to set up an employee network, it is one of the best things I've ever done for this company, and one of my proudest moments. And we are now started to take this globally and launched in the US, Germany, and about to launch in Australia as well. It's quite a long-winded story, but and I know Anjam's is keen to move things along. So if anybody would like advice or any help at all, please do get in touch with me through the Alliance Network or the Hayes, my Hayes email address, which I'm sure will be on hand for everyone as well. But thanks very much. Whirlwind tour.
Thank you, Mike. And just to let everyone know that we will follow up with an email and a link to the report or contact information for all our speakers. And I'd like to thank you, say thank you to Mike, Sharon, Shani and Darroch for your great insight. I am going to open up now to some questions that have been coming through. So let's have a look now. Okay, so first one's from Linda. She says, do you have any practical suggestions for how we can increase job applications from the more diverse candidates? We are a SME and tend to post job adverts on standard messages board or through local recruitment agencies. And I'm going to bring in Mike on this one. Mike, can you just unmute yourself, please? Sorry, yeah. So sorry, the question is that somebody's asking how they can increase the job applications for more diverse candidates. They are an SME and they tend to use post job adverts on their standard message boards or through local recruitment.
Yeah, there's lots of work done around this, and I can actually send you over, or even give you a call to give you some advice on this if you want to. Okay, so the trick is to if you have an idea of what kind of diverse group you're targeting, you change your language to kind of suit, and there is lots of research done to kind of back this up. I'm pretty certain we'll have a number of training packs that I can share with you afterwards if you're interested. But also where you advertise as well is really key. Certain job boards are good for certain diverse groups of people, and other job boards, tend to attract other diverse groups. I know of some really niche job boards if you were looking for a particular demographic. My G-Works, for example, is great for LGBT because that's who it targets. There's a chap called Indy Desai that sits down at the Innovation Hub that runs Desi Blitz. And that is for British-born Muslims, and it's the largest online kind of like website database for job seekers, and employers to advertise their roles on if you're looking for a BAME demographic. So yeah, lots of advice that I could give you if you wanted to get in touch. But there's definitely things you can do, and it really does depend on which recruitment agency you're picking, who've got really good policies and know where to go for a diverse range of people.
Yeah, and I've got to kind of say also, whilst running the D&I leadership pledge as well, we supported a lot of companies who were looking to recruit from whether it's the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic or LGBTQ. And what I always say is that you do have to go out. You can't just advertise on the normal platforms and think people will apply for it if that is not their reach, if they're not reading that newspaper or if they're not using that website. And especially in regards to the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, there's so many local newspapers around that you can advertise in. You have to go out to those communities to try and target them. So thank you for that, Mike. Sorry, Shani.
Loads of specialist websites, every different diversity strand, but also look at your marketing. You know, are you including diverse representation in the image of your company? Is it a place where you will attract diverse talent and people can see themselves reflected? So I think that's a really quick win as well.
One more.
Thank you. Yeah, go for it.
Your recruitment processes. Are your recruitment processes, your interview process, your screening, is that an inclusive process? Because you often find that you're attracting the candidates, but actually they're not getting through. And they could be getting through for a whole number of reasons, such as unconscious bias and some of those things. So it's not just about how you're attracting people and how you cast the net wider. It's also about what your processes look like and whether your processes are inclusive.
Thank you. Sharon, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to follow on from what Dal said, really. I know Birmingham City Council at the moment, obviously we're a big organisation, but we've just announced that we'll be taking the Rooney Rule. So any applications that come in to the council, we've got to have a Black, Asian, minority people on the shortlist. The other thing is that as a cabinet, we will not sit on all white or male panels. So that means also when we're in the recruitment space, if we're doing interviews, we also have a diverse panel, because that does make a difference. And if people outwardly know that you are taking up diversity, then that's important.
Absolutely. And especially when using recruitment agencies, one thing I always say, you are paying for a service. So you can say to a recruitment agency that you want an X percentage of amount from, you know, the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic group, or from the LGBTQ or disability. You've got to specify that and you've got to demand it. Otherwise, recruitment agencies, if you are using them, they won't do that for you. But as you're paying for a service, that's a good way to go about it as well.
There's a rising trend at the moment that we're seeing here at Hayes, where clients are doing blind interviews. Okay, so when the CVs are shortlisted, we have to take off all the data in terms of names, background, all that kind of stuff, and they are shortlisting purely on that. And that's a really good trick. It's proven to be very, very successful when people are looking to hire diverse candidates, because it's very much just done on the CV and the details that are in there. So that's another good trick that we're seeing a big rise in Birmingham.
Perfect, great. A question for you, Dal. Richard saying he's interested in how the media representation of the diversity and inclusion issues within the FA affects you in your role, and how you share your successes to contrast that widespread coverage.
That's a good question. I mean, media representation of D&I, generally issues in football can be quite mixed, as you know. We dominate the headlines. You know, outside of Brexit, COVID-19, and probably the royal family, it's probably football and the FA that get a lot of the space in media and columns. Does it affect me in my role? I mean, yeah, you hear about all these things. You've got to have a relatively thick, you know, quite a thick skin. But we're very clear on what we're trying to achieve. You know, we have a 3-year strategy called In Pursuit of Progress. We are now in the final season of that strategy, which is very clear about what we're doing across football, how we're influencing both the elite game, the grassroots game, what we're doing internally in terms of our own culture and the kind of things that we need to do internally to ensure that we reflect, you know, the society that we serve. And we've got a whole load of inclusion programs that cover LGBT, colour blindness, mental health, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we share our success? We share our success through the various initiatives that we put out. We have, you know, really great comms. We've got a new end of season for year 2 progress report coming out. We report yearly on that, and yeah, you know, you keep going, you are relentless in your pursuit of progress, and that's how we go about it. Some of the things we can't control, you know, some of the things that are said around us, media and things like that, but wherever we have the power to present a positive story, we're doing that. And we are very progressive, and we're probably one of the most progressive national governing bodies of sport in Europe, if not the world.
Thank you, Dal, for that. Councillor Sharon Thompson, is there a website or a person that Richard or any of the other attendees can contact for Black Pound Day? I would love to find a way to support music-related businesses as part of this monthly day of action.
Yes, the website for Black Pound Day is blackpoundday.uk. You can also find them on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, so you can get in contact with them through that means. I'm acting as one of sort of the ambassadors really across here in Birmingham when it comes to Black Pound Day and some of the activities in the city. So you can always contact me as well, and I can help you to navigate that or actually look about collaboration.
Perfect. And another question's come through from Nina for you as well. She says, you bring up such an important point around levelling up. Have you seen success with the initiatives you have mentioned or others that have helped Black businesses?
So with Black Pound Day, that was actually first launched in June. So we're on to our third Black Pound Day. What we've seen with online businesses, it's given them a huge amount of exposure. So I know myself, I've bought things from businesses that have been in London, different places in Birmingham, because it's been online and I wouldn't normally have seen that market. They've also collected the data to see how much people have increased sales when it comes to Black Pound Day. And on the second one, there was £60,000 across the country for the first point of the initiative. And you know, one of the ones that I prided myself of a person that I bought from was a 17-year-old who turned her granny's sauce into a product and is now selling it in shops in her local community. So that's really quite exceptional. And just, I will finally give a little bit of a plug here, the Inclusive Commonwealth Legacy Growth Programme, that's been really good. And I know that they're going into their second cohort and helping people to look at their actual structures within the business and making sure they're hitting a standard. So all in all, the last Black Pound Day, the first Black Pound Day market, there was 43 traders, majority sold out, 1,000 people went through the building throughout the day. So I think that was pretty good.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just going to, actually, Dal, you may be able to answer this question. How would you advise to get an entire company, including leadership team, on board with D&I initiatives? Please come in, all of you, where you can advise on that.
It's really, for me, it's down to leadership, because if your leadership understand what the issues are and what you are trying to do differently, you know, the role of any leader obviously is to pursue the interest of the organisation, whether it be charitable, whether it be, you know, in pursuit of profit, whatever it might be. But actually, the key to financial success is making sure that your people are on this journey with you, because your organisation, as I've said, you know, the organisation's biggest asset is your people. You know, it's all of the people around that are working towards a common goal. It's not your technology. It's not the processes. It is not the building that you're in. It's the people that create this common culture. And so, in order to drive inclusion, equality, diversity into your business, it's about making sure you get the buy-in from the leaders, who then can allow things to be done differently. It's you know, that for me is the number one way in which you will affect change in any organisation.
And just to add to that, appoint a senior champion so that they hold people in the business to account on where you are, where you want to be, and they can help provide resources and budget, hopefully, fingers crossed. And I think we need to realise that inclusion is an action that we are all responsible for. It's not just one person who's leading on D&I, it's everybody's responsibility. So I think having an environment where people can share, you know, the barriers that they're facing, the bias, and then finally, like, how would you like to be treated is what I would say, or your family, friends, if they were to join a business and let's say that they were a person of colour or they were disabled, how would you want them to be treated? That's how it's a question of humanity, I think, that's the way I see it at the end of the day.
Sure. And what would you say to a business who are looking to start in diversity and inclusion? So, you know, there's businesses I've spoken to who have been on the back foot in the sense of don't know how to go about it, but really, especially with what's happened with COVID-19, Black Lives Matters, you know, now businesses more than ever have taken a step back and really looking to their organisations. What advice would you give them?
First, I'd say it's not an easy journey, and don't be afraid, because you're going to make mistakes along the way. So we need bold and brave leaders in this space, and no one's perfect. The landscape's continually changing, but that's not an excuse for you to not get your head around this now for your business. So what I would say is look at the landscape and measure that currently within your business. Do you know how many disabled employees you have? Do you know how many people of colour that you have within your business? So data is really key, as Sharon mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Really get your head around that. And then I would say almost do like a review or a bit of an audit of how your employees feel. What's your representation like? How do your customers perceive you and your brand? Oh, it's such a big question, but I think to start, you have to be brave, you have to be bold, you have to know your starting point so you can track and measure your progress.
Yeah.
And involve people from all across the business as well, and appoint a senior champion. Don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
I would just add in, it's really important, having gone through this journey ourselves here, and recently been gained the NES accreditation. It's the reasoning and explaining to your workforce why it's important. Okay, I completely agree 1,000,000% with what Darroch said in terms of you need the senior leadership. It needs to come from the very, very top. But then the messaging of why we're doing this and how we're going to do it is equally as important, and getting that message disseminated throughout the organisation as this is now what we stand for and this is what we're going to aim to achieve is so key, because then everyone gets brought in. It's not one of those things that you just get told to do and we're just doing it half-heartedly. The reasoning behind it is so important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'm going to come back to policies, Mike, and something in your presentation that you mentioned. Policies sometimes can be just a tick box. You know, that's what it is. We've got our policies. How do we implement them? What would you advise businesses? How do we implement them and make sure they're working for the organisation?
It's a really tricky question, okay, because every business is different, so they'll have their own challenges and that. And I think you have to look at, you have to know the makeup of your business, which is why we're doing our diversity data tomorrow to try and drive that, because you can't make business decisions without data and without knowing what key areas your business needs to focus on. Policies are important, but you've got to have the right policies in place which are supportive and help people grow and be their full selves at work, whether your ethnicity, LGBT, disability, and they've got to feel protected. So every business is different. You should have, most policies will cover a wide range of kind of situations, but everyone's on a different journey. Some people don't have any policies. I'm at the moment, I'm not afraid to say this, and I'm not going to get in trouble for saying it. Our trans policies are nowhere near where they need to be for a big corporate company. But it's something we've identified and we're working towards improving. And that's all you can do as a business, is go, this is where I am, this is where we want to be, and this is how we're going to get there. So it's a tricky one, sorry, but it just depends where everyone is on their journey and how
Sure.
they want to improve it.
I would come in on that and just say, review your policies and make sure that they're clear and provide consistent support to everybody, and continually review them. Don't just write them and then leave them for 10 years, because as I've mentioned, everything is continually changing. And look at best practice as well from other businesses that are maybe in a similar sector to you. Because if you think about it, if you're a line manager and you manage people, the policy is the first place you're going to go. So the policy is so crucial that it has to be up to date, it has to be clear, because that's how the line manager will then go back and treat their employee or their team. And I would say as well, make sure your line managers have regular training and understand their obligations in equality.
Thank you. So I suppose the message is that it's a journey. Nothing's going to happen overnight. You've got to be working towards it. Sharon, can I bring you in on that as well, please?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is obviously in my remit I have to deal with a lot of policy, and in my portfolio, which is different to business, but I think the principle's pretty much the same, is that when I first came in, I made sure that we had this ethos of experts by experience, which is people with lived experience, so that we always went to a group of people that lived through the policies and asked them to challenge the pathway. Because sometimes if you work around policy, it's easy to sit in a building like the council house, do policy and forget how much it affects those at the grassroots of the organisation and your customers. So it's really important to really have that ethos around experts by experience, and also almost being slightly vulnerable, of actually being personable and letting the workforce know that you're willing to learn, unlearn and relearn, because we are in a very changing environment.
Fantastic, thank you. Any last words? So Shani, anything you want to finish with today?
Yeah, I just want to say, don't be afraid to start, or put a lot of emphasis behind your diversity and inclusion journey. And just exactly what you said earlier, Andrew, it is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to happen after consistency, after a consistent approach and consistent behaviour and actions within your organisation, business. So just be brave and go after it.
Perfect, thank you. Dan?
Yeah, just in terms of what I'd said earlier on, which is, your biggest asset is your people, are your people, and therefore ask yourselves as organisations, as leaders, how do I get the best out of my people? What does that mean? What does it mean to come to work and give it your 100%, 110%, and to go the extra mile? Because the quickest way to dwindle any kind of productivity is when you're not getting the best out of your people, and it's your inclusion practices and the things that you do internally that are going to make the biggest difference.
Thank you. Sharon?
I just think I think anybody that's in a position of leadership, whether it's on a board or leading an organisation or a manager, it's about making sure that there's willingness there, and that it's not actually just a tick box exercise because this is something we need to do. The workforce will absolutely feel that and know that. So we need to make sure that the champions that you have on board are there, and they have got a commitment and the passion to get through this, because it's not an easy journey for anybody.
Thank you. And Mike?
Yeah, I would just say, don't panic. Okay, everyone's on different journeys and different start points and different stages of the journey. So there is so much help in and around the Birmingham area that people possibly don't know about. So keep asking questions, and if you're not sure what the answers are, come to one of us on the panel. I'm sure we'll be able to point you in the direction. Between the 4 of us, 5 of us here, I'm pretty certain our networks are pretty extensive in the D&I space. So, don't be afraid to ask questions. Keep challenging everything that's in your organisations, and keep pushing forward with it. We'll all get there at some point, but don't be afraid.
Thank you. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers, and for everyone joining our webinar today. I have learned so much today from our speakers, and I hope you have too. Please stay safe, and let's make inclusion an everyday reality. Take care. Thank you all.
Thanks.